I had hoped for a different outcome.
She accidentally left her letter of secret fantasies on the Mafia boss's desk. Now he won't stop teasing her. Ivy Holloway spent years hiding her passion for the most dangerous man in Chicago. That's why, when she wrote a secret letter full of confessions and fantasies about Adrian Moretti, she never imagined anyone would read it, least of all him. It all happened because of a ridiculous mistake. Adrian asked for some urgent documents. Ivy gathered the papers in a hurry and left everything on his desk. She only realized too late that, in the middle of the Mafia contracts, there was also the one thing that should never have reached his hands. When she went back to retrieve the letter, Adrian had already read every word, and the worst part wasn't seeing him furious. It was seeing him smile, because, after that day, the Mafia boss found a new favorite pastime, making her remember that he knew exactly what she imagined when she thought about him. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout-out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Letter That Was Meant to Die. The bottle of wine was half empty by the time I understood I wouldn't be able to sleep without betraying myself somehow first. It was Thursday, past 11, and the apartment in Lincoln Park had that specific silence of someone who's lived alone too long to pretend it's still just a phase. The heater clicked against the wall with an almost domestic regularity. The rain fell thin against the glass, drawing slow tracks that lost themselves on the empty balcony. And I was on the couch with the laptop on my knees, barefoot, with the hole in my sock at the big toe that I swore I'd throw out weeks ago, and that was still there, like everything I kept putting off. 5 years. 5 years answering phones for Adrian Moretti, organizing schedules that changed 3 times per meeting, booking dinners at restaurants that only existed on napkins. 5 years memorizing the way he held his whiskey glass when a meeting had gone badly, the way he set down his pen before saying no, the way he called me by my last name when he was at the end of his patience and by my full name when he wasn't. 5 years growing old in the chair of the antechamber on the 47th floor of a tower in the Loop, beside a man who barely looked up when I came in with coffee, but who seemed to know, without turning his head, exactly how many steps I'd taken from the door to his desk. I got up to refill the glass one more time. The wood floor froze my feet. The kitchen was cold, with the microwave light blinking the wrong time since the last power outage. I came back stepping slowly, like someone afraid of waking herself. It wasn't love, I told myself. It was exhaustion. It was habit. It was the side effect of breathing too close to someone who controlled the breathing of an entire city without moving a muscle. I'd been repeating that for so long it had started to sound like one of those phrases you memorize to fool your own voice. That night, with the wine going down warm through my chest and the taste of dark grape stuck to the roof of my mouth, I no longer had the strength for the lie. I opened a new document, like so many others I'd opened over the past years, and never had the courage to save. My hands settled onto the keyboard of their own accord, as if they knew the way by heart. I started with no recipient. I didn't need one. Whoever would read it never would. I wrote about the way he walked into a room, and the air rearranged itself around him, about the sleeves rolled below the elbow on Friday morning, about the heavy watch on his left wrist that he turned with his thumb when he was hearing something that didn't deserve an answer. I wrote about the time he handed me a document, and his fingers brushed mine for less than a second, and I spent the entire afternoon pretending I'd forgotten the exact warmth of that skin against mine. I wrote about what I would do if one day he really looked at me, not the phrase, not the spot in the room I occupied between fax and phone, but me. I wrote about his mouth, about the way I imagined his silence in the morning, before the world needed him, about wanting small, ridiculous, domestic things, making coffee for someone slow to reach the kitchen, hearing someone open the door with their own key, having a spot for my head on some shoulder, and wanting big things, things I didn't even have the courage to name in the dark of my own living room. I didn't use his name. I didn't need to. Every comma screamed it. When I finished, it must have been past 1 a.m. I reread it just once, and that was a mistake, because rereading meant continuing to believe that it was true. I saved the file under some random name, Drafter 3, and closed the laptop with the polite violence of someone locking a cabinet with a ghost inside. I washed the glass with hot water, watching the lipstick mark slide down the drain. I turned off the light. I slept with my hair wet against the pillow, and with the clear sensation that I'd done something irreversible, even without knowing yet how big. The alarm went off at 6:30. I didn't hear it. When I opened my eyes, the sun was already coming through the badly drawn curtain, and the clock on the nightstand read 7:43. I got up like someone yanked out of bed by a physical fright. The nightgown stuck to my back with the night's sweat. I tripped over the holy sock I must have pulled off in the middle of the night and tossed to the corner without noticing. I put on the white blouse without ironing it, threw the black skirt over it, pinned up my hair while crossing the building lobby, the overcoat on my arm, the open purse banging against my waist with every step. It had rained overnight, and the sidewalk smelled of wet earth and hot asphalt. I ran to the station, hearing my heels strike the wet stone. I caught the L train with my head down, counting stations I already knew by heart, with the feeling of someone who left something at home and still didn't know what. The Moretti Tower rose black and thin over the loop, like a needle driven into the morning. The cafe on the ground floor already had a line, and the smell of ground beans flooded the lobby before the door even opened. I came in through the side door, the bell rang, and Phoebe saw me before I even got in line. Honey," she said, wiping the steam off the machine with a cloth. "You've got the face of someone who slept through her alarm. Worse. No time to talk today, Phoebe. Lorenzo gets here before 9. She was already preparing the double coffee I didn't even have to ask for, the jet of espresso running dark against the wall of the cup, and pushed the cup toward me without asking anything else. Go. You'll tell me later. I owe you one. You owe me several." She handed me the cup without a lid, the way I liked, and before I could reach for my card, she raised her hand. On the house. It was Friday for her too, in her own way. I left the cafe with the cup burning between my fingers, and crossed the lobby stepping hard on the marble floor. The security guard at the executive elevator recognized me from a distance and held the door. I rode up alone, 47 floors in a silence that seemed to be demanding something from me, with the tired reflection of a woman in a wrinkled blouse looking back at me from the steel mirror. The antechamber was lit. That was the first sign I'd run later than I thought. Adrian was already in the office. His door was closed, but the light leaked under it in a thin yellow line. I tossed the overcoat on the chair, set the coffee down on the phone's base, turned on the computer. The system was slow to boot. I muttered something under my breath. It was at that exact moment that his door opened. Holloway. His voice had the specific tone I dreaded. It wasn't anger. It was deadline. "Good morning," I said, without raising my head. "The port contracts. They're on your desk." "They're not." He waited, and the silence between us gained weight. "The revised version from yesterday." I swallowed. The revised version from yesterday was on my flash drive. I'd taken it to reread on the train, something I never did. But yesterday had been a day when thinking about the office felt lighter than thinking about the empty apartment in Lincoln Park. I'll print it now. Lorenzo gets here in 12 minutes. He closed the door. He didn't slam it. Adrian didn't slam doors. He closed them with the precision of someone who knows a click can weigh more than a shout. I shoved the flash drive into the side port. The folder opened on the screen with that hateful slowness of corporate systems. I clicked on the contracts file. I clicked on Salvatore's report. I clicked on the bank attachment. And in the corner of the screen, in the list of recent documents, I saw the name Drafter 3 blinking as if I'd left the gas on. My stomach dropped 3 floors. I'd put the flash drive in the laptop last night. I'd saved the file, yes, but on the laptop, not on the flash drive. I was sure. I thought I was sure. The printer started spitting out pages with that continuous hum that seemed louder than ever. 22 pages of contract, 8 pages of report, 4 pages of attachment. I grabbed everything with both hands, still warm from the drum, with the sweet chemical smell of toner rising into my nostrils, lined it up against the desk, grabbed the black leather folder, shoved it inside. I didn't check. I didn't have time. The clock on the wall went from 8:58 to 8:59, and I was already on my feet, crossing the carpet, knocking lightly on his door with my knuckles. "Come in." I came in. Adrian had his back to the door, standing in front of the window, with his hands in the pockets of his suit trousers. The city stretched out behind him in a polite gray, cut by the Willis skyscraper in the distance. He didn't turn. I set the folder down on the desk, on the leather blotter, and the low sound of leather against leather was the loudest thing in the room. Revised version, and the attachments. "Thank you." The word came out dry as always. I turned on my heels. I left. I closed the door behind me without making a sound. I went back to my desk. My heart was still racing from the lateness, beating out of rhythm against the seam of my blouse. I took 2 sips of the coffee that was already lukewarm and bitter at the back of my tongue. I opened the calendar. I checked the meeting with Lorenzo, checked the dinner booked for the evening, checked the room reserved on the 3rd floor. Mechanical things. Safe things. When I reached out to put the flash drive in the drawer, I stopped. The drawer was open. Inside it, on top of a stack of still-sealed envelopes, was a loose sheet, folded in thirds, with the faint mark of my thumb in the corner. I recognized the paper before reading it. It was the sheet from Drafter 3, and the flash drive in my hand suddenly felt different. I hadn't only saved it on the laptop. I'd also saved it on the flash drive without realizing, in the rush of wine and exhaustion, and when I hit print all on the contracts folder this morning, I sent the file along with it, without looking. The sheet had come out warm from the office printer, in the middle of the contracts, and I'd shoved it into the black leather folder with my own hands without checking a single page. My breath caught in the middle of my chest. I felt the blood rise to the roots of my hair and drop again, cold. I looked at the closed door of Adrian Moretti's office as if the air had turned to glass. Lorenzo's 12 minutes became 10, became 8. I stood up without noticing, my legs heavier than they usually were. I walked to the door. I stopped with my hand suspended over the handle, the cold metal half a centimeter from my palm. And on the other side of the wood, low, contained, held back by the throat of a man who hadn't made that sound in so long that I didn't recognize it right away, I heard Adrian Moretti laugh. Chapter 2. The Smile She Had Never Seen. I stood frozen with my hand in the air long enough for my skin to cool. On the other side of the door, the low laugh stopped. The silence came back. That silence was worse, because I now knew it had been broken by me without my consent. I stepped back twice. The thick gray carpet muffled the sound of my heels, and even so, I felt as if every move of mine were being recorded by the walls of that corridor. I went back to my desk. I sat down as if the chair could hide me. Lorenzo Bianchi arrived 9 minutes later. Adrian's consigliere was the kind of man who aged well. Impeccable gray suit, thin-rimmed glasses, an old leather briefcase, the kind that cost a fortune 20 years ago and was worth double today. He greeted me by name, smiled faintly, knocked twice on the door with his knuckles, and only entered after Adrian's brief nod from the other side. I didn't have the courage to look through the crack. The door closed with that dry click of solid wood I'd known for 5 years. I stayed. I worked. I answered 3 calls. I booked 2 lunches that would be canceled. I replied to an email from the accountant, all automatic, all without thinking, and the whole time the folded sheet in the drawer on the other side of the wall weighed as if it were made of lead. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When Lorenzo left, he threw me a look I couldn't read, maybe because I didn't want to read it. Adrian appeared in the doorway right after. He leaned his shoulder against the frame. I didn't look up. "Holloway? Sir, look at me." I looked. It was a mistake. He had his right sleeve already folded once over his forearm, the black vest without the jacket, his dark hair combed back with the precision of someone who allows nothing to fall out of place, and his mouth had a new line at the corner, a smile that wasn't a smile that knew, "Come here a moment." I stood up. My legs didn't seem to obey at the same rhythm as the rest of me. I came in. He closed the door behind me with the same polite click as always. He walked to the desk. He sat on the edge of it, not in the chair, and crossed his arms. The morning light struck obliquely through the window of the 47th floor and drew a bright rectangle on the dark wood. On the blotter was the leather folder with the contracts, and beside the folder, aligned with his invisible ruler, the sheet, folded, with the corner lifted, read, "This," he said, "is not a contract. No, it was delivered as a contract. It was a mistake. It was." His voice was in a tone I'd never heard. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't irony. It was curiosity. Adrian Moretti didn't have curiosity. Adrian Moretti had conclusions. "Mr. Moretti," I began, and my voice came out too firm, because everything underneath it was trembling. "Give it back, please. It was a personal file. It wasn't meant to end up here. I know it wasn't. Then, please." He tilted his head slightly. He picked up the sheet. He didn't open it. He turned it between his fingers like someone weighing a playing card. His long fingers, with short, clean nails, handled the paper with a care that was almost offensive. "You wrote this, sir." A direct answer. "Holloway, yes or no?" I tried to say no. The word stopped at my palate and died there, because lying to Adrian Moretti inside his office at 9:40 on a Friday was something that not even I, with 5 years of practice in small administrative lies, could pull off. I swallowed hard. I lifted my chin. Yes, that's when he laughed. Again, this time in front of me, with no door in the way. The laugh came out low, short, through the nose first, and then through the mouth, in a single syllable that held more surprise than humor. It was the first time in 5 years that I saw his coldness crack, and the crack had the exact shape of a man who'd discovered something he hadn't expected to find inside a black leather folder. "Mr. Moretti, you may go, Holloway. Excuse me? You may go back to your desk." I looked at the sheet. He followed my gaze, in no hurry at all, like someone learning to read a new language. He didn't give it back. "The sheet," I said. "It stays with me." "Sir, it stays with me, Holloway." I had no answer. I left. I closed the door. I went back to my desk. I sat down. I stared at the computer screen for a full minute without seeing a single letter. The air conditioning hummed low over my head, and even so, I felt my face burning, as if all the blood in my body had chosen to rise at once. Phoebe texted me asking if I'd already broken a mug that morning. I answered with a single sentence, "Need to talk to you later." She replied with 3 dots. Then, "Honey, what happened?" I didn't answer. The morning passed as if someone had cut the speed of time in half. Adrian came out of the office twice. Both times, he passed my desk without stopping. The first time, he left an envelope for Lorenzo. The second, he asked for water. That was the one where he paused beside my chair and stayed a second longer than necessary before continuing to walk. And I knew he was looking at me, and I kept my chin down over the keyboard as if there were something very interesting in last month's spreadsheet. I felt the warmth of his body near my shoulder before he stepped away, and it took me several more long minutes to manage to type a single line that made sense. At noon, Marco Ferraro came up. The casino captain was a man in his early 40s, broad shoulders, loud voice, and he treated the antechamber as if it were his own house. He greeted me with a curt nod and went in. The door stayed ajar. I didn't close it, not out of curiosity, out of survival. It was the first meeting of my shift in which I wanted to know whether the temperature of the room was high or low. "Marco," Adrian said, in his flat tone, "about Lake Forest. The Castellanis want to renegotiate before Friday." "No, Adrian." I said no. A pause. "You've got something else." Marco huffed. There was the clink of ice in a glass. Adrian was drinking water. "Marco, probably something worse." "I've got the dinner list," Marco said. "Read it." Marco read names. I recognized about 7. 2 of them were known problems. Adrian approved them all with a short, "yes," until he stopped at one. "Not that one." "Why?" "Because I said so." Adrian. Marco. Silence. One of those silences that weighed more than any order. "Anything else?" Adrian asked. "Your agent works too much," Marco said, in that voice he thought was friendly and wasn't. "You should let her go before she becomes a problem." There was a pause the size of a knife. "My agent," Adrian said, and his voice came slowly, in no hurry, the way he spoke when he was controlling something, "runs this office better than any of your captains runs their shifts. Her schedule is none of your business. Marco." Marco swallowed. I heard his air swallow. "One more thing," Adrian continued, and his voice changed, in a way so subtle that only someone who'd been hearing that voice for 5 years would be able to notice. "About the report I received today. There's a word in it I didn't expect to read. A word. Domestic." I froze in my chair. My fingers stopped over the keyboard. The air vanished from somewhere between my ribs. "I don't remember using that word," Marco said. "I know you didn't. So, I'm just commenting." Adrian said it in the tone of someone commenting on the weather. Marco didn't understand, because Marco wasn't sitting at my desk, on the other side of the wall, with his skin burning to the roots of his hair. The word domestic was in my letter. It was the word I'd used in a paragraph in the middle, about wanting small things, about waking up and making coffee for someone slow to reach the kitchen, about the delicious dread of wanting an ordinary life with an extraordinary man. I'd written domestic in quotation marks, like someone mocking her own desire. Adrian had read it, and he'd just dropped the word into a Mafia meeting, in the middle of a conversation about the Castellanis, with the specific tone of someone putting a bell on a cat's neck, just to see if she keeps moving. Marco changed the subject. He left 20 minutes later without even looking at me. I remained seated. My breath wouldn't return to its rhythm. The 1 o'clock sun had begun to strike the antechamber window, and the reflection of the neighboring tower drew a bright square in the corner of my monitor. Phoebe sent me another text. I answered with a single word. Later. Adrian went out to lunch with Lorenzo at 2. As he passed my desk, he stopped. I looked up against my will. He was close enough for me to catch his cologne, a dry, woody scent. with a note of bergamot I'd recognize in the dark after 5 years arranging his jacket on hangers. "Holloway, sir, eat." It wasn't a question. It was an instruction. I opened my mouth to give some polite reply, and he'd already kept walking. The afternoon was worse because it was normal. He came back. He asked for a report. He asked for a call to Salvatore. He asked for a coffee. Each request was the same request as always, but it now had a new layer beneath it. A layer I knew was just his and mine, and that he was letting rise slowly, like someone heating water calmly to see at which exact minute it boils. I brought the coffee with steady hands, set the white porcelain cup down exactly at the right corner of the desk, the way he liked it, and turned before he could say anything. He didn't say anything. That was worse. At 5:30, when the window light began to turn golden, he called me back. I came in. He was standing behind the desk, with his jacket on again, buckling the watch onto his wrist, ready to leave. The Chicago sky behind him had gained that shade of molten copper that only appeared a few minutes a day, and his silhouette cut against the glass like a clean incision. "Next week," he said, without looking at me. "Off-site meeting, Gold Coast, Friday. You're coming with me." "I don't go to off-site meetings, sir." "You're going to this one. Isn't Lorenzo enough?" That's when he looked at me, and the look was the look of a man who'd spent the entire day teasing me with a single word inside a crowded room, and who was now in front of me, alone, and still hadn't finished. "Lorenzo is enough for a lot of things," he said, his voice still low. "Not for this one, sir. Friday, 6 in the evening. I'll send the car." He left before I could answer. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air like a signature. I stood in the middle of the room, with the golden light cutting across the carpet diagonally, and realized 2 things at the same time: that the sheet I swore I'd tear up was still somewhere on that desk, and that the man who'd laughed low behind that door this morning hadn't finished laughing. Chapter 3. Teasing Turns to Care. The following Monday began with thin rain falling over the loop, and with the certainty, inside me, that I would pretend the entire weekend, and the Friday before, and the sheet he hadn't returned, as if nothing had happened. I crossed the Moretti Tower lobby with my head down, coat soaked at the shoulders, and rode up to the 47th floor without looking at my own reflection in the elevator mirror. I'd decided 3 things on Sunday: not to think about the letter, not to think about his laugh, not to think about Friday in Gold Coast. I'd already failed all 3 before the coffee was ready. The antechamber was empty, as always before 8. The gray carpet absorbed the sound of my heels, and the indirect ceiling light came on in layers. Slowly, as I advanced, I turned on the computer, organized the week's schedule into colored columns, sorted the pile of mail. Each familiar gesture gave me back a little of the person I'd been until the previous Thursday. The door of his office was closed, and for a second, I let myself believe that maybe he'd decided to forget everything, that maybe we'd go back to being just the boss and the assistant I knew myself to be. The smell of new paper and freshly brewed coffee was part of that illusion. I breathed deep and forced myself to believe in it for a few more minutes. The door opened at 8:10. Adrian came out of the office in a dark tie, sleeves already without the jacket, and stopped in front of my desk. The sound of the handle was louder than it should have been, or maybe it was just my ear, too attentive. "Good morning, Miss Holloway." His voice was the same as any morning. The look wasn't. The look lingered half a second longer over my face, as if checking for something only he knew to look for. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti," I answered, keeping my eyes on the monitor. "Cancel my 10 o'clock. I looked up without thinking. With the Castellanis. May I know why? For the record." He rested his hand on the edge of my desk. Just the fingers. The skin was clean, the ring on his pinky reflecting the cold white of the lamp. Record that I changed my mind. I wrote it down. The pen trembled once, almost imperceptible, but it trembled. When I looked up again, he'd already gone back into the office, leaving behind him the discreet smell of something woody that I'd been pretending not to recognize for 5 years. Bergamot, maybe, and burnt wood underneath. I memorized it without meaning to, as if my nose had a schedule of its own. The Castellani meeting was rescheduled for 2:30, and when the clock passed 2, Lorenzo Bianchi appeared in the antechamber with a briefcase under his arm, and that patient expression he wore when something wasn't smelling right. He greeted me with his head, gave 2 short knocks on the door, and went in. The Castellanis arrived 10 minutes later, 2 older men in gray suits whom I announced over the intercom before leading them to the room. The office door opened shortly after, and Adrian was standing in the doorway. "Ivy." I stood up at once. It wasn't Miss Holloway. It was something else. "Get your notebook and come," he said. "But stay near the door. If I ask you for coffee, that's your signal to leave." "Coffee," I repeated, closing the notebook against my chest. "Got it. No hesitating." No hesitating. I went in behind him and positioned myself near the window, away from the meeting table. The rain had started falling sideways against the glass, and the reflection of the skyscrapers distorted into yellow and blue smears. The Castellanis were two older men, in gray suits, who looked at me for half a second longer than necessary. Lorenzo noticed. Adrian noticed before Lorenzo. He sat down without offering the others a seat and said, "Begin." The conversation advanced in Italian with bits of English. I understood enough to note terms, values, dates. At 20 minutes, the tone shifted. The taller of the Castellanis began to use a word I didn't know, but recognized by its weight. Adrian turned the ring on his finger, slowly, once. It was the only movement. The air inside the room grew denser, as if the window had been sealed from inside. "Ivy," he said, without turning. "Coffee." I left the second after. I closed the door with the care one takes closing the lid of a piano. I sat down at my desk with my heart in my ears and stared at the clock without registering the hands. The tower's pipes creaked in the distance, and each crack of the building sounded like a decision being made in the room I'd just left. 15 minutes later, the Castellanis came out of the office with quick steps, without looking at me. Lorenzo came behind, stopped near my desk, and said in a low voice, like someone handing over a key, "He took you out on purpose." It was smart. Was it necessary? Lorenzo hesitated. His eyes dropped for a moment to the badge on my neck, then came back. It was. The rain continued into the night. When I finally closed the computer, it was past 10. The floor was empty, the main lights already off, only the lamp on my desk still lit, forming a yellow circle over the papers. I put on my coat, grabbed my purse, went down in the executive elevator, and as I crossed the tower door, I nearly bumped into a large man standing on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, a face of stone. The rain ricocheted off his shoulders without him seeming to notice. "Miss Holloway," said Dimitri Castellucci, with the same intonation one uses to announce the weather. "Dimitri. Car." He pointed with his head to the black sedan parked at the curb, engine running, tinted windows. I looked at him, and then at the rain, which streamed down the building's gutter in continuous threads. "I can take the train." "You can, but you won't let me." "No." I got into the car. He closed the door with that calculated delicacy that enormous men sometimes develop with delicate objects, and went around the vehicle to the driver's side. The interior smelled of new leather, and a black coffee forgotten in the holder. The drive to Lincoln Park usually took about 20 minutes with traffic. I stared at the window trying not to make conversation, and failed. Was it Mr. Moretti who asked? It was. Because of today's meeting? No. Because of what, then? Miss Holloway. He met my eyes in the rearview mirror just once, and his chin moved 0.5 millimeter, maybe a personal version of patience. He asks. I drive. I laughed without meaning to. The sound came out strange inside the silent car. Was that advice? It was. I rested my head against the seat and watched the rain run down the glass. The street lamp lights passed in elongated streaks. And for a moment, I let exhaustion speak for me. Let the shame of the previous Thursday sink into some corner I didn't need to visit now. When we reached my building, Dimitri got out first, opened my umbrella, waited for me to enter the lobby, and only then went back to the car. He didn't say goodnight. He waved with 2 fingers. It was the closest thing to a farewell I'd ever seen come out of him. On Tuesday, I worked through lunch without noticing. Around 2, a brown paper bag appeared at the edge of my desk, folded with almost surgical precision. Steaming ravioli, a fork wrapped in a napkin, a small bottle of sparkling water, no note. The smell of melted butter and sage rose before I opened the bag. I raised my head and looked at the closed office door. I didn't knock. I ate slowly, ashamed of liking it, feeling the warmth of the pasta against the roof of my mouth as if it were a silent confession he'd forced me to swallow. On Wednesday, it repeated, soup, this time, and a slice of dark bread I'd mentioned. Months earlier, the morning he asked me if I'd had breakfast, and I'd answered that I didn't have lunch because I hated the building's soups, but loved the dark bread from a bakery on Wells Street. Almost certain he hadn't even raised his head when I answered. Almost. I touched the hard crust of the bread with the tip of my finger, and stayed too long without biting, processing the size of that memory of his. It happened on Wednesday night, the floor empty again, the clock passing 9, and me organizing a folder of contracts when I heard the office door open. Adrian came out without his jacket, without his tie, sleeve rolled up to the elbow, a glass in his right hand, exhaustion evident at the corner of his mouth. The amber of the whiskey caught the reflection of my lamp and sent a square of light dancing across the ceiling. He stopped in the middle of the antechamber. He looked at me. "You're still here. I'm finishing the Greco contract. Finish it tomorrow. I'd rather leave it done." He walked to my desk. The carpet muffled his steps, but I felt the approach on my skin before I heard it. He set the glass on the edge, beside the stack of papers. "How long?" I knew exactly what he was asking about. I didn't pretend, even though everything inside me wanted to pretend. "How long? What exactly, Mr. Moretti?" The letter. The word stayed in the air between us, as if it had weight. I kept moving the papers to have something to do with my hands. The tips of my fingers were cold, my pulse too warm, long enough to have learned to keep things to myself. Doesn't seem like it to me. I lifted my chin. It was an accident. It was. Then you can forget it. No. I stood up without thinking. The chair scraped on the floor, a short, dry sound that cut through the silence of the whole floor. We stood one beside the other, with the width of my desk between us, and even so, the distance seemed smaller than it should. He didn't move, neither did I. The woody scent had carried with it a breath of his whiskey, and something warmer, closer. His breathing was controlled in a way only someone who's making an effort can maintain. I recognized the effort because mine was identical. "Mr. Moretti. Adrian. Adrian," I repeated, and the words scraped my throat. "What do you want?" He looked at me for a time too long to be comfortable. I saw the answer pass across his face and not reach his mouth. His jaw clenched once. His hand over the glass tightened 0.5 millimeter more. When he finally spoke, it was low. "Go home, Ivy. Dimitri is waiting downstairs." He left before me. He crossed the antechamber, got into the executive elevator, and the door closed without him looking back. I stood there for a full second with my hand on the edge of the desk, feeling my heart thunder against my ribs, not knowing whether I wanted to cry or laugh, or both at the same time. His glass was still there, the ice slowly dissolving. I went down. Dimitri was in the car, exactly as Adrian had said. We didn't exchange a word during the drive. The streets were emptier than on Monday, and the rain, thinner, almost mist. When we reached my building, he handed me the umbrella back with the same ceremony as Monday, and said, without looking at me, "Miss Holloway." "Yes, Friday's going to be long. The meeting in Gold Coast?" He nodded once. "Anything I need to know?" Dimitri was silent for 1/2 second. It was long enough. His fingers drummed once on the wheel, then stopped. "Stay close to him." I went up. I locked the apartment door, turned on the kitchen light, and realized I'd forgotten the folder of contracts on my desk, at the office. It didn't matter. I'd get it in the morning. I drank a glass of water, changed clothes, lay down without eating, and slept with the feeling of having crossed a week in 3 days. His name stayed in my mouth for hours, even after I closed my eyes. Chapter 4. Crossfire in the Gold Coast. The gallery was in a restored townhouse on East Erie Street. White walls, light marble floor, large canvases on the walls that cost more than most people see in their entire lives. I arrived shortly before 6 in the evening, with Lorenzo at my side and a folder pressed against my chest, the time Adrian had demanded in a low voice the previous Friday, with the same precision with which he closed any door. Friday had entered me in the morning like a taut rope, and each passing hour pulled another millimeter, until I felt the knot at the nape of my neck and the metallic taste under my tongue. The air inside smelled of fresh floor wax and some woody perfume that had been sprayed not long ago, probably to disguise the rest. The recessed ceiling lights cast a golden glow over the paintings, and each step echoed on the marble as if the whole house were paying attention to who was arriving. "You stay near the back wall," Lorenzo said as we climbed the 3 entrance steps, his voice low, without moving his lips more than necessary. "Don't talk. Don't look at the Russian. Take notes." I noted that before you even said it. "Good." He adjusted his jacket with a small gesture, more for himself than for me, and pushed the inner door with his shoulder. Lorenzo was like that, always economical in his movements, as if every extra effort were an unnecessary luxury on a day of heavy work. Adrian was already inside. He wore black, a dark tie, the ring on his finger, a whiskey glass in his left hand, as if it were an accessory. Marco Ferraro paced back and forth near the window, and Dimitri occupied the door as if he were part of the building's structure. When I came in, Adrian looked at me just once. It was enough for me to understand that he'd fought against the idea of calling me to this meeting until the last minute, and that the inner battle still wasn't over. I walked to the back wall with calculated steps, feeling the low heel of my shoe sink a little into the rug covering part of the marble. I set the folder on a side chair, opened the notebook, checked the pen. Everything became ritual. Everything became anchor. Yegor Volkov arrived 15 minutes after us, with 2 men and a wide smile from someone who'd rehearsed it in front of the mirror. He greeted Adrian in Russian, then in English with an elegant accent, kissed the ring in the air as if it were an old joke. His 2 thugs kept 3 steps away, hands crossed in front of their bodies, gazes fixed on a dead point on the wall. They sat at the round table in the center of the gallery, and the negotiation began in the tone of an afternoon tea. I took notes. Percentages on port routes, division of warehouses to the south, mutual guarantee of non-interference in casinos. Yegor spoke slowly, smiled a lot, and with each proposal pulled the rope a little more. Adrian answered with short sentences, never raising his voice, never altering the position of his body in the chair. Every 5 minutes, Lorenzo exchanged a look with me that said, "Keep taking notes. Don't raise your head." The clock on the opposite wall marked the time with a low tick that seemed too loud to me. I caught the smell of the whiskey in Adrian's glass 3 meters away, or imagined I did, because by this point each of my senses was deliberately heightened, trying to catch ahead of time something that hadn't yet begun. At 40 minutes into the conversation, Adrian set his glass on the table with a dry sound. "No." Yegor opened his hands. "Adrian, my friend, we're not friends." And the answer is still no. "You're forcing me to look for less cordial paths. I'm sparing you the trouble of pretending cordiality." The Russian laughed, without it reaching his eyes. His mouth opened in a rehearsed arc, but his pupils stayed fixed and cold, like 2 pinheads. He stood, adjusted his jacket, gave a small bow in my direction that turned my stomach, and left with the 2 men behind him. The front door closed with a dry weight. For about 20 seconds, no one in the room said anything. The silence that settled had texture. It was a silence of marble, of glass, of held breath, and each of us seemed to occupy a different corner of it. "He'll come back," Marco said. "He will," Adrian answered. "But not today." Lorenzo set down his pen. "I'm not sure of that." Adrian looked at me. He was going to say something. He didn't. The financier waiting in the VIP room at the back of the gallery was 2 doors away, with an 8-figure contract on his knee, waiting for a signature only Adrian could give. Adrian stood, buttoned his jacket with those 2 mechanical gestures I'd already memorized without meaning to, and headed toward the side corridor. He stopped halfway. He turned. "Ivy, yes. You stay with Lorenzo, in this room. Don't leave." "All right." He crossed the door into the VIP room. The gallery sank into a strange silence, the kind that forms after something important has left a room. The golden light seemed a little colder. The paintings seemed a little larger, and I pressed the notebook against my lap with both thumbs. It didn't last. The first shot came from the kitchen at the back. A dry crack, then 2 more, then a sound of glass shattering that didn't match any of the paintings hanging on the walls. Lorenzo grabbed my arm the second after and threw me behind the partition wall. Marco shouted something I didn't understand. Dmitri already had his gun in hand, crossing the gallery in 3 strides, shouting Adrian's name in a voice I'd never heard from that man before. "Stay down," Lorenzo said in my ear, his breath hot and short. "Don't get up." The back door. I know. I felt the cold marble through the fabric of my skirt, the hard texture of the baseboard against my back, and my heart beating in a place that wasn't my chest, that was my throat, my temple, my wrist, all at the same time. The shooters came in through the kitchen corridor. I saw 3 shadows pass on the other side of the partition wall, counted them by their steps. More shots. A painting fell from the wall 3 meters from me, and the glass scattered across the marble floor in a tiny, glittering rain. I pressed my forehead to my knee and tried to breathe through my nose, counting slowly to 4, then to 6, then giving up on counting. Lorenzo rose a little, peeked, came back. The VIP room is blocked. They came in on the wrong side. Adrian. He knows. Another shot. Closer. Lorenzo pushed me to the left, toward a narrow corridor that connected the main hall to a small storage room behind the white walls. We left the shooters. Line of sight. The second 2 bullets hit the partition wall behind us and tore out 2 holes the size of coins. We ran crouched to the storage room. Lorenzo locked the door from inside and put his back against the wood, his breathing going in and out in an uneven rhythm. "Stay here," he said, panting. Adrian will kill me if I leave you here. He'll kill me more if I don't reach him. I'm going to try. You're not going to. I am. It's the only play. Lorenzo. Ivy. He held me by the shoulders just once. Hard. His fingers sank into the fabric of my blouse, and I felt the warmth of his palm through the thin cotton. If I don't come back in 3 minutes, you open this door and run to the right until you reach the service exit. Dimitri will be in the alley. And if he's not, he will be. He left. The door closed behind him, and I was alone in the storage room, with my heart rising to my throat, hearing distant shots and shouts in 2 languages I couldn't tell apart. The room smelled of old cardboard and the acrylic paint of stored packaging, and there was a single yellow bulb hanging from a wire over my head. I counted to 180. I counted to 300. No one came. I opened the door a crack. The corridor was empty. The smell of gunpowder had reached even there, mixed with something acidic that must have been the smoke of burning paint. I walked, crouched, hand on the wall, counting the steps to the corner that opened onto the main hall. That's when I heard his voice on the other side of the wall, muffled by the shots, shouting my name between 2 dry cracks. Closer. One more shot, closer still, and a short grunt I recognized before I could process it. I heard steps breaking glass. I heard a body slam against the wall. I heard his breathing approaching the corner in contained bursts. When I reached the corner, I heard the heavy step stop on the other side, and I froze. Ivy. It was him. Adrian appeared at the corner with blood at the corner of his mouth, jacket torn at the shoulder, the gun still in his right hand. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm too controlled for someone who'd just crossed crossfire, as if he were forcing his own body to obey. When he saw me leaning against the wall, something in his face collapsed from a height I'd never seen. It wasn't relief. It was something else, colder, that I couldn't name. Are you in one piece? I am. Look at me. I looked. His eyes were dark in a different way, without the filter of control, without the layer that normally covered everything. For the first time, he was looking at me with no protection between us. In one piece, he repeated. In one piece. He put the gun in the holster under his jacket and pulled me against his chest for half a second, with his hand open on the nape of my neck, with a pressure that asked no permission. I caught his scent up close. Whiskey, soap, recent sweat, and the rough fabric of the jacket against my cheek. Then he pushed me away in the same gesture, held my hand, and started pulling me down the corridor in the opposite direction from the hall. The negotiation, I said without thinking. No. Adrian, the financier was... No. We crossed a service door, went down a narrow flight of stairs whose steps creaked in a high sound that seemed to announce our passage, and came out through a steel door that opened directly onto the side alley of the gallery. The freezing street air hit my face with a dry shock. The armored car was there with the engine running. Dimitri opened the back door without saying a word. Adrian pushed me inside first, got in behind, and the door slammed before I could breathe twice. Safe house, he said. Right away, Dimitri answered, and the car took off. I rested my head against the seat. The leather was cold and smelled faintly of professional cleaning, the kind that doesn't hide that something there has already been cleaned several times. I was shaking. I hadn't noticed until that second. My hands, my shoulders, my chin, everything was shaking, and I couldn't stop even pressing my fingers against each other. Adrian looked at me. He extended his right hand. He placed his open palm over mine, slowly, and held it. He didn't speak. He didn't let go. We crossed the lights of the north of the city in silence. The signs passed by the window in colored blurs, red, gold, white, and each traffic light cut his face in a different light. The blood at the corner of his mouth had dried into a thin line he didn't even bother to wipe. Every now and then he turned his head a little and checked whether I was still breathing properly. His hand was warm. Mine. Ice. He didn't mind. He gripped tighter each time the car braked. And it was like that, with that constant and silent pressure, that I gradually came back into my own body. Dimitri spoke a single time during the drive, without taking his eyes off the road. Marco's fine. Lorenzo's fine. 2 shooters. The rest is your problem, boss. It will be, Adrian said. But at the right time, first we close the city against him, then we collect. The sentence hung in the car like a cold, deferred promise. I knew what it meant. Not immediate revenge, but the kind of siege Adrian built in silence over weeks, until the only way out was through his door. For some reason, knowing that calmed me instead of frightening me. When we reached the penthouse building, Dimitri stopped in the closed garage. The sound of the engine shutting off echoed in the empty concrete. Adrian got out first, opened the door on my side, and offered me his hand as if I were made of porcelain. He didn't take his eyes off my face as we rode up in the private elevator. The reflection of the two of us in the mirrored walls showed a couple I had no authorization to recognize. Him in a torn jacket, me with my hair undone and my blouse wrinkled, our hands still joined in the space between us. He didn't speak in the corridor. When we reached the penthouse door, he took the keys from his pocket, opened it, let me go first, came in behind, and locked it. The door's latch made a low click that resonated on the dark wood floor. The penthouse was in shadow, only an indirect light in the corner of the room, and the panoramic glass showed Chicago down below like a lit circuit. He leaned his back against the locked door and looked at me from the other side of the room. Ivy, yes, he breathed deep. For the first time since I'd walked into the gallery that afternoon, he looked like a whole man, without armor, and what came next was not the voice of the Mafia boss in Chicago. It was something else, deeper, more bare, that hung in the air between us like a key turning in a lock. We need to talk. Chapter 5. The Key. The penthouse door closed behind us with the low sound of a heavy lock, and for an instant, I thought it was the entire world being left outside. Adrian remained with his back to me, his hand still on the handle, his broad shoulders breathing slowly inside the dark coat. His head dropped forward for a second, almost imperceptible, and it was in that minimal gesture that I understood the size of what he was holding back. I didn't move. I wouldn't know where to go. But we need to talk, he repeated, and this time the sentence came out lower, slower, as if he were tearing word by word from some place he'd locked away long ago. I took 2 steps into the room. The low lights of the penthouse drew soft outlines on the dark furniture, and the city, outside, lived behind the glass without making a sound. Lincoln Park seemed an entire country away. I could still smell smoke at the ends of my hair, the metallic taste of fear at the back of my throat, the recent memory of the gallery corridor walls against my back. The rug absorbed my steps as if it wanted to hide me. Adrian turned. He took off his coat with restrained gestures and left it over the arm of the couch, smoothing the fabric a single time. And the gesture was so out of place that it seemed like a confession. He walked to the corner bar, poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass, and stopped. He didn't drink. He looked at the liquid as if it were the only thing in the world that still obeyed. "Sit," he said. "I'm not tired." "I know. Sit anyway." I sat in the library armchair, against the wall of oak shelves, because it was the spot farthest from him in that room, not out of fear, out of old instinct, the same one that made me write letters I never sent. Adrian noticed. He sat on the arm of the couch, diagonal, far enough to give me space, and close enough that I felt his tension cross the rug. "I didn't know they were going to attack today," he began. "If I'd known, you'd never have set foot in that gallery." "I know. You shouldn't know. You should be angry." I almost laughed. It came out through the nose, a short sound, with no humor at all. "Adrian, I've worked with you for 5 years. I know the difference between what you calculate and what slips away." He looked at me a second longer than necessary. The glass remained forgotten in his hand, the whiskey tilting slowly against the crystal. 5 years, he repeated, and I didn't know how to see you for 4 of them. The sentence settled in the middle of the room. It was worse than if he'd shouted. I rested my head against the side of the armchair and breathed deep. "Don't do this," I asked. "Don't do what?" "Don't talk about these things today. I just heard gunfire 3 meters away. I have no defenses at all." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm saying it." He stood up. He set the glass on the sideboard without having drunk, and the sound of the crystal against the wood was the only punctuation in that silence. He crossed the room slowly, with that controlled calm he used when deciding where to step inside a negotiation. He stopped at the balcony, opened the glass door, and stood there, leaning against the frame, giving me the hard profile of his chin and his tense shoulders against the Chicago sky. The autumn breeze entered the apartment and stirred my bangs, brought the smell of river and wet asphalt. "Come," he called, without looking. I stood up. I went. The balcony was narrow, with a dark stone floor and a low iron railing. Down below, the loop pulsed in yellow lights, the river cutting through the city like a glowing scar. Adrian made room for me beside him. I rested my forearms on the railing. The cold bit through the thin fabric of my blouse, and I didn't care. His shoulder was a few centimeters from mine, and that piece of air between us felt electrified. "I spent years waiting for your voice in the morning," he said, looking at the city. Before the coffee, before the reports, before whatever the entire day demanded of me. It was the first thing I organized in my head. Has she arrived yet? I gripped the railing harder. The metal was freezing against my palm. Adrian, let me finish. Otherwise it won't come out. I stayed quiet. The office felt empty when you went down for lunch. I couldn't work properly. I invented meetings to make you come back earlier. He laughed, without sound, just a short movement of his shoulder. Me, Ivy, inventing meetings. For an assistant. I wasn't just an assistant. I know you weren't. I'm the one who pretended you were. My throat tightened. I looked ahead because looking at him would undo me faster than I wanted. The city lights trembled at the back of my eyes. Why? I asked. Because everything that becomes important to me becomes a target. His voice stayed low, controlled, but I heard the crack. My father became a target. The people he loved became targets. I grew up learning that feeling has a cost. And then you arrived, with your absurd schedule and your sarcasm, and you began to cost more than anything. I felt the first tear fall without warning. I didn't wipe it. I had no strength to pretend. You read the letter, I said, my voice catching in the middle. Why did you laugh? He turned his face to me. His dark eyes were softer than I'd ever seen. It wasn't amusement. It was old astonishment, held back over weeks. Because I'd never been seen like that, he answered. No one had ever described me as a man before, only as an empire. You wrote about the way I hold the glass when I'm tired, about the pause I make before saying no. Ivy, no one's seen me tired in 10 years. You saw it, and even so you chose to arrive earlier the next day. The tear became 2, became 3. I bit my lip to hold back the rest. The wind pulled a lock of my hair toward him, and he followed the gesture with his eyes. I was ashamed of that letter. I know. I still am. There's no reason anymore. He turned to face me. He raised his hand and, for the first time in 5 years, touched his fingers to my face. It was a careful touch, as if he were confirming I wouldn't dissolve between his fingers. His skin was warm despite the wind, and there was a faint callus on the tip of his thumb that passed over my cheek and took a tear with it. I won't be a hidden weakness, I whispered, my voice breaking in the middle. I spent 5 years swearing to myself it wasn't love, that it was exhaustion, that it was habit. I lied. It was love. It is love. And even so, I can't be the pretty secret you keep in a drawer. If that's how it'll be, I'd rather keep serving you coffee and pretending. He was silent for a second. He inhaled deeply. He rested his forehead against mine. His breathing trembled slightly before steadying. You won't be a secret, he said. Never again. I closed my eyes. His breath hit my mouth. Warm, close, still contained. There's something I need to give you, he murmured, and I thought about it long before today. The gunshots just hurried it. He moved his hand from my face and brought it to the inner pocket of his jacket. He took out a small key, golden, with no keychain, and held it in his open palm between us. The cold city light caught its surface and made it look older than it was. The penthouse is yours too, he said. Not as an employee, not as a hidden lover, as the woman I want to see in the kitchen when I come home. As a person who decides whether she wants to come in or whether she wants to leave. The key is the way I know to say this without lying. I looked at his palm, at the long fingers, at the matte gold ring on his pinky with the family crest, at the line of veins on the wrist where the watch ended. I reached out and took the key. It weighed less than I expected. It weighed everything. The metal was warm, contaminated by the heat of his pocket. Adrian, tell me. I don't want to be loved from afar. I've already been loved from afar. He held my face with both hands. His palms covered my entire cheeks, and I closed my eyes for a second, because it was impossible to sustain the intensity of that gaze so close. I've loved from afar too, he said. I don't recommend it. It was the first time he made me laugh since the gallery. A small laugh, wet, crossed by tears, that died the second after because he leaned in and kissed me. It was a slow kiss. It wasn't the kiss of the man I invented in the letter. It was better, because it was real. His mouth was warm, firm, unhurried, and I felt the tips of his fingers close carefully on the nape of my neck, as if he were afraid I'd disappear between thought and movement. I gripped the front of his shirt, felt the expensive fabric crumple between my fingers, and beneath it his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was no longer the one from before. His heart beat as loud as mine. When we pulled apart, he looked at me up close, without letting go of my face. Stay, he asked. Low. I'm already staying. He took me by the hand. He turned off the lights of the room one by one as we walked down the penthouse corridor, and the bedroom door closed behind us without a sound. Charter. The morning light came in slowly through the balcony when I opened my eyes. I was lying on my side, wrapped in his dark robe, which smelled of cedar and stored whiskey, and for a second I didn't know where I was. It took me 2 to remember. I smiled to myself, against the pillow, feeling the heavy fabric of the robe brush against my skin, like a promise that had stayed. I got up. I crossed the corridor barefoot, the cold wood floor under my soles, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee reached me before I arrived. Adrian was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, barefoot too, in black trousers and a gray t-shirt I'd never seen. He saw me arrive in the reflection of the glass before I spoke. He didn't say anything. He just poured a second cup of coffee and pushed it toward me across the counter, stopping it exactly on the wrong side, on the side where I always grabbed his mugs by mistake in the 5 years at the office. I took it. I smiled without looking. "You noticed?" I said. "I've noticed everything you do for 5 years, Ivy. You'll have to get used to it." I took a sip. Strong coffee, no sugar, the way I drank it. The steam rose and blurred my vision for a second. I looked at him over the rim of the cup. Adrian was watching me in a way I'd never been watched, as if he were confirming, paragraph by paragraph, that I was still there. "Why that face?" I asked. "I don't think I've believed it yet." "Believed what?" "You in my kitchen." I felt heat in my face. I looked at the coffee. He crossed the counter, stopped behind me, rested both hands on the granite on each side of my body, and pressed his mouth to my hair for a second. Without kissing, just resting, like someone anchoring. His chest lightly touched my back, and I felt his breath descend on my neck. "We're going to need to talk about a lot of things," he said, quietly. "I know. About Yegor. About how to present this to the family. About what changes in your routine, and what doesn't change in my work. I know. But not now. Not now," I agreed. We stayed like that for a time I didn't want to measure. The city woke outside in golden light, and the buildings mirrored one another as if they were recognizing each other. I thought, without saying it, that the most shameful letter of my life had brought me to that kitchen, and that maybe shame wasn't the right word for what I felt when I wrote it. The intercom buzzed. Adrian stepped away slowly, and the cold returned to the spot where his body had been. He answered. Dimitri's voice came from the other side, dry, short as always, but with a different weight. "Yegor wants a peace meeting," he said. "Today. Says to tell him where." Adrian looked at me over the handset. His hand found mine on the counter, and his fingers laced into mine with a new firmness, one that asked neither permission nor apology, and I understood, the second after, that the key I'd taken the night before opened more than just one door. Chapter 6. The Moretti's Woman. The armored car stopped in the basement of the Moretti Tower shortly after noon. The garage smelled of cold concrete and motor oil, and the fluorescent light cast long shadows on the cement columns. Dimitri opened my door before Adrian, and I got out with the penthouse key still in my coat pocket, feeling the small weight touch my thigh with every step. It was a single key, square-headed, cold against the fabric, and even so, I had the impression that it burned. Adrian waited for me on the other side of the car. He extended his hand. I held it without hesitating, and the gesture cost less than I imagined it would cost. "Ready?" he asked. "No." Good answer. The executive elevator went straight up to the rooftop, in near total silence, only the low hum of the mechanism cutting the air. 47 floors of Chicago unfurled across the glass wall at the back, the blue-gray lake down below, the wind beating against the building without entering. I saw the reflection of the three of us in the chrome mirror of the cabin, Adrian in a dark suit, me in the beige coat wrinkled from the night before, Dimitri motionless in front. He had his back to us, hands crossed, without saying a word. His only reaction to my hand in Adrian's was a very brief half-smile, at the corner, that vanished before I was sure. "You smiled," I said. "No," he answered. Adrian laughed quietly beside me, a sound contained in his chest, more felt than heard. The door opened onto the executive rooftop with a hydraulic whisper. I'd set foot there a few times over 5 years, always with a clipboard in hand, always taking note of who was present. This time I came in without a notebook, without a pen, with Adrian's hand at my back, at the exact height of my waist, and the strange sensation of crossing a border no one had drawn on the floor. The space smelled of old cigar, whiskey, and Lorenzo's woody cologne, which I recognized from a distance. The leather armchairs were arranged in a half-circle facing the glass. and the heavy curtains had been pulled back to let the afternoon light flood everything. Lorenzo Bianchi stood near the low table, impeccable gray suit, observing the city. Marco Ferraro was lighting a cigarette on the other side, a closed expression, the lighter's flame briefly reflecting in his dark eyes, the crystal ashtray resting on the low table within reach of his hand. Two younger captains talked quietly near the bar, with crystal glasses in their hands, the ice clinking slowly. When they saw us, everyone stopped. Adrian didn't let go of my hand. "You gentlemen," he began, in that low voice of someone who never needs to raise his tone. "I brought Ivy here today because you need to know, from my own mouth, one thing. She is not the assistant from the 47th floor office. She is the woman I've chosen to share my life with. From today on, any information that affects her affects the Morettis. Any threat that touches her is treated as a threat to the family. Anyone in this room who has a problem with that may speak now." The silence stretched. I felt my own heartbeat in the pulse joined to his, louder than I wanted. Marco let out the smoke slowly, and the gray drawing rose straight in the still air. "Adrian," he said, "with all due respect, this is madness. This is going to paint a target on her the size of the tower. Yegor already sent men into a gallery of yours. What do you think he does when he learns there's a woman who matters?" "The target was already painted yesterday," Adrian answered, without moving. "The difference is that now the city will know who's shooting alongside me. It's not the same thing, Adrian. An assistant is an assistant. A Moretti's woman is a weakness with a name and an address. You're handing it over on a platter." "Marco, I'm not finished." Marco took a step forward, and the cigarette burned a centimeter between his fingers without him noticing. "I saw your father make this mistake. I saw what happened afterward. I won't applaud the son repeating it." The whole room went still. Lorenzo lifted his eyes from the glass slowly, not yet intervening. I felt Adrian's hand squeeze mine, this time as both a warning and an alliance. "I know what I am," I said, before Adrian could answer, and I surprised myself with the firmness of my own voice. "I worked in this family for 5 years. I know how its world is. I know the name of every captain, the name of every enemy, and the name of everything you don't say out loud. I'm not here asking for protection. I'm here because I chose to be, and because, with all due respect, Mr. Ferraro, I was already a target the instant that letter came out of the wrong printer. The difference is that now I'm not alone." Marco stared at me for a long time. The cigarette burned down to the filter in his fingers. Lorenzo chose the exact second to speak. "Marco, she's right, and Adrian is right about the target. The choice is no longer whether we mark her or not. It's whether we defend her together or pretend we didn't see." Marco put out the cigarette in the crystal ashtray, lingered a fraction of a second longer with his finger on the filter, as if extinguishing the last objection along with it. "All right," he said, with no joy, but with no more argument. "Welcome, Ivy. I hope, by God, that you two know what you're doing. Who she is? She already was yesterday," Dmitri tossed out from the corner, without taking his hand from his pocket. "We were just ashamed to call her by her name." Marco turned to him. "You spoke. I spoke. You never speak. Today, I spoke." Adrian held back a laugh. So did I. The tension in the room gave way half a centimeter, and that was enough for everyone to breathe. Lorenzo approached. He greeted Adrian with a short nod, and then turned to me with his usual controlled courtesy, his hand extended, the grip firm without being demonstrative. "About Yegor," he began, returning the room to work. "We need to close it before the end of the afternoon." Adrian pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. He dialed without consulting any contact list. When the other side answered, he spoke in dense Italian, short sentences, the name Castellani punctuating twice. I saw his jaw clench once when he heard the response, saw the ring turn on his finger, saw his silence on the other end of the line cost 2 seconds too long before he let out a low, "Concordato." He hung up. He looked at Lorenzo. "The Castellanis are in neutral ground. The Drake. Tomorrow. Yegor's going to have 3 families across from him, not 1. Lorenzo nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth rising a millimeter. "Good. Good," Lorenzo agreed, and broke into a sideways smile, more personal. "And it's also good, Adrian, to see you decide something for the right reason for the first time in 10 years. He left before Adrian could answer. Marco followed, with a dry nod to me that held more respect than approval, and the glass door reverberated quietly as it closed. The younger captains came to greet me one by one, calm, rehearsed, as if they'd already decided at some point between the elevator and the exit that this woman standing beside their boss wasn't going anywhere. Each handshake came with a short sentence of welcome, and none lasted longer than necessary. When the rooftop emptied, Dmitri gave a last nod to Adrian, threw a short look at me, the same silent advice from the car, stay close to him, and closed the glass door behind him with an almost paternal care. We were alone. Adrian walked to the edge, rested his hand on the stone parapet, and stood looking at the city. The sun was beginning to fall, golden, heavy, spread over the skyscrapers like honey poured slowly. I took the phone from my pocket, saw 3 messages from Phoebe in a row. "Are you alive? Come get coffee now. Honey, I swear I'm coming over there." And dialed. She answered before the second ring. "Ivy, I'm in one piece. I saw it in the news. Gallery. Gunshots. I saw the Moretti name. Phoebe, don't tell me you were there." I was there. Silence on the other side. Then a long breath, one of hers, of a barista who's seen everything. "Honey, do you know what you're doing?" "No," I swallowed. "But I know who I'm doing it with. That's the worst and the best answer you've ever given me." A pause. "Coffee tomorrow, on the ground floor, 7 in the morning, and you tell me everything you can tell me. Deal." And Ivy, "Yes. If he hurts you, I'm going over there. I'm not afraid of any mafia." I laughed. Wet. "I know you're not." I hung up. I put the phone away, felt the cold wind brush the nape of my neck, and crossed the rooftop, my heels tapping lightly on the stone floor. I leaned on the parapet beside him. The wind beat at my hair, lifted a lock over my eyes. Adrian reached out without turning his face, and tucked the lock behind my ear. His fingers were warm, rough at the callus, gentle in the touch. Adrian took the wallet from his back pocket. He opened it. From inside, he took a sheet folded in 4, with the precise marks of paper already weary, the creases deeper from having been made and unmade many times. It was my letter. I recognized it before even seeing the ink. "You kept it," I said. In a whisper the wind nearly carried off. "I said I would. You said it in your head, not out loud." "Even so." He unfolded just the corner, carefully, showed it was there, and folded it back. He returned it to the wallet's pocket, like someone putting a relic back in the exact place where it matched the rest of his life. "Why this one?" I asked, turning my body a little toward his. "If I were you, I'd have burned it for the shame it caused." "Because it didn't cause shame," he answered, without turning his face. "And it caused all of this." He made a short gesture with his head, taking in the rooftop, the city, the glass, the silence between us, me standing there beside him. I looked at the city along with him. Chicago was lighting up in orange, the lake reflecting the sky, dark buildings beginning to blink in the highest windows. A siren cut through far away and was swallowed by the height. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the thin fabric of the suit, and, beneath it, the steady warmth of his body. Adrian wrapped his arm around my back and held my shoulder firmly, and it was exactly in that second, without warning, that a shadow crossed my mind, light and quick like a bird passing against the glass, and vanished before I could name it. I closed my eyes for an instant. I breathed deep, the smell of his coat, the warmth of his hand on my arm, the distant sound of an L train cutting through the loop down below, the low moan of the wind between the rooftop's glass. When I opened my eyes again, the thought had already passed, as if it had never come. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, quietly, his voice vibrating against my temple. "About you," I lied, smiling, nothing else. He kissed the top of my head, lingering, unhurried. He squeezed my shoulder a little more, like someone confirming a name in the silence, and I stayed there, with the key to a penthouse in my pocket and my letter folded in his pocket, watching Chicago surrender to the night, safe for the first time in 5 years. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. For 2 years, Ivy Holloway believed Adrian Moretti would be hers forever. Then an ambush nearly killed him, and the truth that came afterward was even crueler. To keep him alive, Ivy had to do the one thing capable of destroying him from the inside. Look into his eyes, in the hospital room, and tell him she never loved him, that she'd grown tired, that she'd confused fascination with love, that she wasn't born to take care of a broken man. She saw the exact moment something died inside him. Adrian survived the bullets, but the man who walked out of that hospital was no longer the same. He swore he'd make her pay for every tear she tore from him, and when he discovered the secret she carried, the revenge would be slow and personal, And when he finally understood that Ivy might have left to save him, the secret she carried could already change everything. Because if even her love was a lie to protect him, what else did she hide while he bled alone, destroyed by the woman who swore to stay? And what if the child she carried wasn't only hers, but the final proof that he should never have trusted anyone? Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.